Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're looking at the 2026 US Senate elections and going through every Senate race that has the most recent poll conducted and assigning the state by the current poll or the polling data here. So there are 11 states that actually have polls that have been released thus far for the 2026 Senate map. The ones that do not have any polls conducted, I filled in either red or blue based on the predictions for the respective parties in the states. So, for instance, a state like Idaho does not have a poll conducted, but we know it'll be safe for the Republicans, just like Oregon has no polls, but we know it'll be safe for the Democrats. So, starting with the first state that I'm going to go over is the state of Massachusetts. There is one poll that was conducted from back in February between Ed Markey and John Deaton, which is looking like the likely Republican and Democratic matchup in Massachusetts. And Markey is leading here by 20 points. Not really a surprise at all in Massachusetts, but that will be a safe Democratic win in the base state. Now with that, we're getting into the states that are usually more talked about on the 2026 Senate map. Now first, I'm going to start with the state of Texas, because Texas is an interesting Senate race. This is going to be John Cornyn versus Ken Paxton versus maybe Wesley Hunt. That's very contingent on how that's going. But this is going to be one of the most competitive races to watch for in all the United States. On the Democratic side, Colin Allred, James Talarico, both are running in this race, and this should be a pretty competitive general election. Now, the ratings do have it listed as likely for the Republicans, and the polling so early on thus far seems to suggest that. For John Cornyn versus Colin Allred, Cornyn's leading by 7 points, a likely Republican win. For Ken Paxton versus Colin Allred, the most recent Democratic poll, which is sponsored by Allred's campaign, shows Allred leading by about 2 points, a lean Democratic win. The Emerson poll shows Paxton leading by about 5. That would be around a likely Republican win as well. Now, it does not have any polling, I don't believe, for Talarico yet in the general election or the Democratic primary. Got to see here if there's been any polling done since the news. Just the Emerson poll from the middle of August showing Allred leading, but Talarico was not included in that one. Public policy polling shows about an 8-point race on that. So based on those ratings, taking out the internal poll aspect, Texas right now would start in the likely Republican category based on the most recent polling. Now we can go to another state. We'll look at the state of Iowa. Iowa only has polls that have come out thus far for Republican incumbent Joni Ernst, who is officially not running. So I was skeptical on actually leaving this in the polling part or not, but Ashley Hinson is running in this race. On the Democratic side, lots of Democrats are running. Bob Kraus, Jackie Norris, Nathan Sage, Josh Durek, Zach Walz are all running. The polling for the general election, when Ernst was still in the race, showed a pretty competitive race. Every single matchup had the race under 5 points. This is all we have to go off of, obviously. Now the race is going to be different, but I think Iowa starts out, at least based on the polling data, in the lean Republican category of that under 5 point but over 1 point margin. So Iowa starts out as lean for the GOP. Now we can move to the state of Ohio, where Ohio is going to be a lot more interesting than perhaps it potentially could have been. This is going to be Republican incumbent Senator John Husted. He's now running for his first full term after being appointed as senator to replace J.D. Vance, and he'll be facing off against former U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown in what's expected to be a very competitive marquee matchup. Now, the most recent poll from Emerson College came out in August 18th and 19th and shows Husted leading over Brown 50-44, about a 6-point lead with 7% undecided. Certainly, Ohio has been more of a likely Republican state, but it shows this matchup is probably going to be pretty competitive. Still, with that 6-point lead, though, this would have Husted starting out in the likely Republican category versus Sherrod Brown in what should be a very close race. That puts the Republicans up at 49, Democrats at 44. Now, we have some interesting states to look at as well. First, we'll go to the state of New Hampshire, where New Hampshire is going to become very interesting to talk about. Democrat incumbent Jeanne Shaheen is not running. She is retiring. And Chris Pappas, U.S. Representative for the Democrats in the 1st District, will be the Democratic nominee. On the Republican side, former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown is the likely Republican nominee for right now, but with former U.S. Senator John Sununu expected to join the race by November of 2025, that could really shake things up. Where right now, Scott Brown in the early polling shows he's the clear leader to be the Republican nominee. When John Sununu's name is mentioned, though, it's a complete flip. Now John Sununu is the favorite to win the Republican primary over Scott Brown. So that plays a very big role here. The ratings are all lean Democratic at this current point in time. For Pappas versus Scott Brown, Pappas is leading by 10 points in the most recent poll. That's about a likely Democratic win. In that St. Anselm poll, this was a coefficient Republican pollster. For the St. Anselm poll, it was 48-37, an 11-point lead for Pappas. Now, Sununu has not officially joined this race yet, but if he does, it shows to be a lot closer, though it has been done by two Republican-aligned pollsters, showing a 3-point race and a 2-point race, both very competitive with a lot of undecided votes. So until Sununu joins the race, we're going to go with Scott Brown versus Chris Pappas, where it would start New Hampshire out into the likely Democratic category based on the recent polling. But if Pappas does join the race, and I were to do another video like this maybe in a month or two, New Hampshire, based on the polls we have, would go down into the lean Democratic category. So New Hampshire could be a very interesting one to watch for at this current point in time. So that is the state of New Hampshire. Now we have the state of Maine, where Maine, this is very interesting. This is Republican incumbent Susan Collins. She's facing off against potentially a lot of Democrats that are currently running, including maybe the current governor in Janet Mills. There hasn't been much general election polling done. In fact, there's only been one poll from the Democratic pollster Public Policy Polling, which is affiliated with the Democratic Party. So obviously their numbers are certainly going to show Democrats doing much better than they probably will. And it is aligned with the candidate, Dan Cleven, as well. So my usual rule of thumb is I shift about 5 points in the opposite direction of the poll towards the opposite party when it's partisan like this one. So for Susan Collins in this case, I think that 35% to 44, about a 9-point margin, would go down to around a 4 to 5 point margin. But even still, the Democrat, based on this poll, would still be leading in this race. So even with that shift in mind, the Democrat would still be leading by about a lean Democratic margin in the state of Maine. Now we're going to move to the state of Alaska, where Alaska is a Senate race that would not usually be competitive, but could be this time around, due to the fact that former U.S. Representative Mary Peltola could be running on the Democratic side. Now, as for the polling in this race, the only hypothetical polling is Dan Sullivan versus Mary Peltola. The most recent poll from Alaska Survey Research shows about a 5-point lead. Now, like with Sununu, we don't know for sure if he'll be entering the race. We don't know for sure if Mary Peltola will be entering the race, but this is the only polling data done for this one. It also shows Sullivan leading by a just around likely Republican margin. So for the sake of this video, we're going to put Alaska into likely Republican for right now, though again, like New Hampshire, we'll have to wait and see on if that specific candidate decides to enter the race. Now we're going to go to the state of Nebraska. Nebraska is an interesting one because due to the fact that it's not usually competitive, but Republican U.S. Senator Pete Ricketts is facing off against independent Dan Osborne, who ran a very competitive race in 2024. Now, the recent polls that have come out have been two Democratic polls, Lake Research Partners and Change Research, both showing very tight races, the most recent one having Osborne actually leading over Pete Ricketts. Now again, my rule of thumb for the polling is 5 points towards the other direction, but Osborne leading by 1 point here would put Ricketts at very least into the lean Republican category. Now, this isn't always 100% going to be right, but even if it's not, an Osborne who's running as an independent can narrowly win it by 1 point for the Democrats. That would be very big for the Democrats' chances at taking back the Senate in 2026. But again, based on that rule, Nebraska goes in lean Republican. If you want to fight about it in the comments, you certainly can, but still, Nebraska goes lean for the GOP. Now we're going to go to the state of Michigan. Michigan, one of the 3 main battleground seats thus far for 2026, and the polling for this one in this open race, now that Gary Peters is retiring, is showing a pretty competitive fight, with Haley Stevens versus Mike Rogers right now, based on the early polling data, the most likely matchup on the Democratic side, with Stevens leading in the first 3 polls, and it shows a very tight race. Stevens leading over Rogers by about 2 points in that poll, 1 point over Rogers in the Glenn Garrett group poll from May, while Rogers leads over El Sayed and Rogers over McMorrow as well. So this one could get very close and is looking like to be very close, but right now, based on that early poll, we have the Democrats starting out in the lean Democratic category. Now we have North Carolina. North Carolina is going to be a very interesting race as well. That former Democratic governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, is running in this race. Tom Tillis, U.S. Senator, is not running. Former RNC Chair Michael Whatley is going to be the Republican nominee, and he will be facing off against the former governor, Roy Cooper. And what the general election is looking very close, and a lot of early polling thus far shows a very close race with Roy Cooper, the Democrat, leading in this race. Now, right now, the most recent poll from Harvard Polling, which again is a Republican-aligned pollster, shows Cooper up 4 points over Michael Whatley. Democratic poll before that from Change Research shows Cooper leading by about 7 points. But this is going to be a very close race in actuality, but right now, Roy Cooper, oh, that's the governor's map, excuse me, Roy Cooper is currently leading by a lean Democratic margin in North Carolina based on that poll. And lastly, we have the state of Georgia. This is going to be Democratic incumbent Jon Ossoff. He'll be facing off against potential Republicans who are running in this race. Now, the three most notable are Buddy Carter, Mike Collins, and Derek Dooley. The early polling thus far shows a pretty tight race with Mike Collins narrowly leading over Carter and Dooley at this current point in time. The most recent polling as well has shown Ossoff with a lead over most of the Republican candidates. Now, the most competitive matchup has been Collins versus Ossoff, where the most recent Republican Quantus Insights poll shows a tied race with a lot of undecided vote. The one before that shows Ossoff leading by about 1 point over Mike Collins. So going with the assumption that Collins is the Republican nominee, Ossoff would win based on the most recent poll by under 1 point in a very close race. So based on the latest polls, the 2026 Senate map right now is looking like Republicans would win 51 Senate seats to Democrats 49. With, if you want to give Nebraska to the Democrats, even though that was a heavily skewed internal poll, you could do that and then put the Democrats at 50-50. And again, this is going to change over the next few months or so. With Alaska, if Mary Peltola runs, with New Hampshire, if John Sununu runs, this could also impact the map as well. But right now, Democrats, Republicans 50-50, or using that 5-point rule, Republicans 51, Democrats 49. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we're looking at the 2026 governor's elections map and going through each state that has a poll conducted and looking at the latest poll and assigning the state based on that. So there are about 10 states on the governor map that have polls conducted for candidates in the race that are currently running. Now there are 26 states that have not had any polls conducted in their respective states or with the candidates in the race that are running, and I went ahead and assigned them the current prediction rankings that I have for the states. So some competitive states like Wisconsin and Georgia, both of which are expected to be two of the closest governor states in the country in 2026, have not had any polling data conducted yet. And my current rankings for these races are Wisconsin as tilt for the Democrats and Georgia as tilt for the Republicans. So I went away and did that. Now onto the states that have had polling been done thus far. First, we're going to start with the state of Massachusetts, as this one's pretty easy. For Maura Healey in the general election versus one of the Republicans, it's going to be an absolute Democratic blowout, not really too much of a surprise. Massachusetts starts out as safe for the Democrats. Now, in neighboring Connecticut, it's a little bit more interesting because Connecticut does have some history of having more competitive governor's races, but at the same time, the only poll is from a candidate that's expressed interest from Aaron Stewart, and it's about an 8-point lead. Now, it is also an internal poll, and normally for internal polls, I shifted about 5 points towards the other candidate's direction as overestimating candidates of the poll, usually by about 5 points. So even still, the 8-point lead goes to about 13 points or so. So that would make Connecticut go into the likely Democratic category based on that. Now we can go to the state of New York with Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul and looking like Republican Elise Stefanik in this race. I don't believe Stefanik has officially entered, but it's looking like she probably will. And the polling thus far shows Hochul versus Stefanik being a pretty big Democratic win. The most recent poll from Siena College shows Hochul already breaking 50% and Stefanik at 27%, still with 17% undecided. Based on the way New York elections have historically gone, I expect Stefanik to get a large amount of those undecided votes, but still based on those most recent numbers, that would move New York into the safe Democratic category for Kathy Hochul. Now we can look at the state of Michigan. Michigan's going to be a very interesting race as this is open now that Gretchen Whitmer is term limited and cannot run for a third term. And independent mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan, is running as an independent candidate, which is going to make it very competitive as well. Jocelyn Benson is going to be the likely Democratic candidate at this current point in time. And on the Republican side, U.S. Representative John James is currently the leader on that. So the general election is completely up for grabs right now. The most recent poll shows about a 1-point lead for Benson over James over Duggan. And when it goes to definite voters, it goes up to 5 points, but we're going with the likely voters on this one. So Michigan's governor's race in the most recent poll starts out in the tilt category for the Democrats in the state of Michigan. Now moving a little bit south to the state of Ohio. Ohio, Republican Vivek Ramaswamy is the leading candidate to be governor on the Republican side. All of his other Republican opponents have currently dropped out of the race, including Heather Hill and Dave Yost. Hill now running as an independent. On the Democratic side, right now the Democrat is running is Amy Acton, with former U.S. Representative Tim Ryan expressing interest, and announcements should be pending in the next few weeks or so. So what happens in this race? Well, right now the early polling from Emerson College shows a 10-point lead for Vivek Ramaswamy over Amy Acton in this race, with 12% undecided. Now, similar to New York, I expect a lot of those undecideds will go for Amy Acton based on how Democrats have historically performed in the state of Ohio, but still a 10-point lead for Vivek in a nonpartisan poll would put Ohio into the likely Republican category. Now we can go to the state of Tennessee. This is going to be an open governor's race, but Republican U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn is running and will probably win the GOP primary. And for the Democrats, based on whether it's Jerry Green or Marsha Blackburn versus Jerry Green or John Rose versus Jerry Green, it's going to be a safe over 15-point Republican win in both scenarios. So unsurprisingly, Tennessee, based on the most recent polling, goes in safe for the Democrats. Now, Florida is actually a little bit more interesting. Florida, we've known it to become a very safe Republican state in recent election years. However, the Republican primary, Byron Donalds is currently the leader to be the GOP nominee. On the Democratic primary, only former Republican David Jolly is currently running in this race. And it's also worth noting the only polling done thus far for Donalds versus Jolly, the most recent poll has Jolly leading over Donalds by 1 point. Now, this is an internal poll, and again, my rule of thumb for internal polls is shifted 5 points in the opposite direction, as I do believe internal polls overvalue the person's candidate by about 5 points on average. So doing this, though, would make it a lean Republican win for Donalds over David Jolly. And the AIF poll from back in August, which is a Republican-aligned poll, has Donalds up by about 8. So again, shifting that one 5 points towards the Democratic side would be about a 3-point lead. So in both cases, the governor's race for Florida right now, based on the polling, shows about a lean Republican win. Now, I expect it will be a much larger Republican win come November of 2026, but for right now, Florida starts out on the polling side of things in lean Republican. Now we're going to go to the state of Alaska. Alaska, this is a Republican governor, Mike Dunleavy. He is term limited, and this race could get very interesting depending on what happens on the Democratic side. Former minority leader of the Alaska Senate and uncle of U.S. Representative Nick Begich, Tom Begich, is declared running in this race. Former U.S. Representative Mary Peltola, still listed as a potential Democratic candidate. Now, for the polling thus far, it's a little bit up and all over the place, but it shows that Peltola in this matchup starts out with an early lead and will be likely favored to win in this race. Now, for the head-to-head matchups of Begich versus Peltola, be about a tied race with Nick Begich, the Republican representative. Dahlstrom versus Peltola, about a 10-point lead. But again, this is also data for progress, a Democratic poll. So this poll has been conducted, but with Peltola not currently in the race, we really don't have too much to go off of. And the ratings are a little bit over the place. Solid for the GOP, likely for the GOP, and Race of White House has it as a toss-up. Now for Begich at this point, doesn't have him advancing to the general except for one matchup versus Nancy Dahlstrom, which shows about a 12-point lead over Begich and Dahlstrom in that scenario. So based on that, as Peltola is not currently in the race, Alaska goes into the likely Republican category. I just wanted to show you where that poll number would be coming from. If Peltola did decide to run, it would be in the lean Democratic category based on that poll, but also based on that Democratic poll, likely Republican starting out in Alaska. Now in the state of Nevada, this is going to be Republican incumbent Joe Lombardo. He is facing off against likely Nevada Attorney General Aaron Ford. The only thing that could mix this race up is if former Governor Steve Sisolak decides to run. The polling thus far shows Lombardo leading over Ford by 21 points in a poll from May of 2023, so we really don't have much polling data to go off of here, and what's going to be a pretty competitive race in the state of Nevada. But still, Nevada starts out as safe for the GOP based on that one poll, but again, the results will be much closer. Now we move to the state of Arizona. Arizona, which is expected to be one of the closest governor's races to watch for in 2026. This is going to be Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs will be facing off against either U.S. Representative Andy Biggs or former candidate in 2022 for governor Karen Taylor Robson. Now the polling for this one shows a very close race. The most recent poll from Noble Predictive Insights shows Hobbs leading Biggs by about 2 points, lean Democratic margin, and Hobbs over Karen Taylor Robson by about 2 points, a lean Democratic margin. So with that, Arizona currently starts out in the lean category for the Democrats, a lean Democratic win. So based on the polling map right now of all the polls, And the personal predictions for this map, Republicans currently start out with 19 governor seats going their way. Democrats start out with 17, with some very wild ratings out of places like Nevada and Florida essentially being flipped. So that's all I have for you in today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. Today we're looking at both the governor elections up in 2025 and going over the latest polling data and polling averages in the two states for the governor's races and assigning the states based on those numbers. So without any further ado, let's get into the first state, which is going to be the state of Virginia. Virginia, this is going to be an open governor's race as Glenn Youngkin is term limited and cannot seek a second consecutive term, and we've known who the two candidates are going to be for a pretty long while now. Lieutenant Governor of the state of Virginia, Winsome Sears, is running to continue the work that Youngkin has done, and she'll be facing off against former Democratic representative from the 7th District, Abigail Spanberger. And as the initial part showed here, this race is looking to be likely for the Democrats to win. Most of the predictions currently show it as likely Democratic, some even have it as safe Democratic. And the polling is showing a pretty similar trend here. Right now, the most recent poll from Christopher Newport University shows a 12-point lead for Spanberger over Sears, with still 8% of voters undecided. The most recent polling averages, Real Clear Politics has Spanberger leading by 7.1%, 48.8 to 41.7, with 9.5% saying they're voting for other or currently undecided. Decision Desk HQ has Spanberger at 50.5, Sears at 41, which is a 9.4% lead for Spanberger. And Race to the White House has Spanberger up 50.4, Sears at 40.8, 8.8% other or undecided, with 9.6% leading. On average of all the polling averages, Spanberger has 49.9%, Sears 41.2%, 9 points for other undecided, about an 8.7% lead for Abigail Spanberger. Now these numbers right around with the ratings of 1 or under being tilt, 1 to 5 being lean, 5 to 15 being likely, 15 plus being safe, would put the state, or Commonwealth, of Virginia into the likely Democratic category for Abigail Spanberger versus Winsome Sears at this current point in time. And this is really not too much surprising when you look at the recent trends of this race and the polling data really going back into the spring and even into the early winter. It showed that Abigail Spanberger started out with a likely Democratic lead over Winsome Sears, and for the most part, it is not really narrowed up much at all. And now as we close into the final month or so of campaigning in October, it looks like Spanberger is going to win by a likely margin over Winsome Sears. Now we can look at the state of New Jersey, where Democratic governor of the state of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, is term limited and cannot seek a third consecutive term. Now, both of these races were an open primary, and they were relatively competitive depending on the margins, though. The Democratic primary was the more competitive of the two, where U.S. Representative Mikey Sherrill from the New Jersey's 11th District ended up winning the Democratic primary against several Democrats like Ross Baraka, Stephen Fulop, Josh Gottheimer, Sean Spiller, and Stephen Sweeney. And actually, the primary was pretty competitive when everything was said and done. Sherrill ended up winning by about 14 points. The polling going into it showed Sherrill as the leader by around 10 to 15 points or so, and that ended up happening pretty much exactly. On the Republican side, nominee for governor in 2021 and also a candidate in 2017, the former state assemblyman Jack Ciattarelli became the Republican nominee after winning his Republican primary. His most notable challenger was Bill Spadea, the radio talk show host in New Jersey. He ended up winning the primary as well. Look for the results here, where Ciattarelli ended up winning roughly 67.82% to 21.75% for Spadea. So Ciattarelli won pretty much everywhere in the state of New Jersey. Now for the general election, it was looking like that New Jersey is going to be the more competitive of the two governor's races for 2025 right now for the governor's races, and the predictions still seem to have it that way. Cook Politico, lean, Inside Elections, lean, Savile Crystal Ball, lean, and Race to White House having it as likely Democratic, though. For the polling, it shows a actually pretty similar race to Virginia, and also in large part being bolstered by the most recent poll from Quinnipiac University, showing Sherrill leading Ciattarelli by about 8 points, 49 to 41, 2% voting other, and 6% currently undecided at this point in time. And when it goes to the voters that are a head-to-head matchup for Sherrill and Ciattarelli, it becomes 51-42, where Sherrill leads still by around 9 points after being leading by about 8 points, as the overall polling averages is pretty much right in line. Real Clear Politics has Cheryl up 47.6, Chitterelli 38.8, 13.6% undecided, Cheryl leading by 8.8%. Now, the only bit of silver lining for Chitterelli here is that Cheryl has a little bit less support than Abigail Spanberger in Virginia does. Cheryl getting around 47.6% does present a little bit of an opening for Chitterelli to potentially win this race if he can consolidate essentially almost all of that other or undecided vote that's left out there, though that is a very tall task. Decision Desk HQ, though, also has Cheryl leading by 7.1%, 47.2 to Chitterelli 40.1, with 12.7% undecided. Race to the White House is Cheryl at 48.7, Chitterelli 40.7, 10.6 undecided or other, Cheryl leading by 8. On average, it shows Cheryl at 47.9, 39.9 for Chitterelli, and 12.2% other or undecided. So there is enough undecided vote out there for Jack Chitterelli to take the lead from Meggie Cheryl, but given how strong she's starting out right now, and Chitterelli hovering around that late or that high 30, low 40s number, it's either one of two things that are happening. Either the polls in New Jersey are wildly off like they were in 2021, or the polls are essentially dead on, and we're going to see Mikey Cheryl win by a larger margin than expected a few months ago. But based on the polling data right now, that 8 to 7 point range is in that 5 to 15 likely Democratic category, which means the state of New Jersey for the governor's race right now also falls into the likely Democratic category right now. So both governor's races for 2025 are tracking on the polling data right now to currently be likely Democratic wins. And this usually goes with the off-year election environment. Usually the states vote to the opposite of the party in the White House. For instance, when the Democrat Joe Biden was president in 2021, Virginia voted for the Republican Glenn Youngkin, and New Jersey came very close to voting for the Republican Jack Chitterelli in that race. Just to show you what that governor election ended up looking like, in 2021, Youngkin won by 1.9%, Murphy won over Chitterelli by only 3.2%. Now in 2017, President Trump gets elected in his first term, and tell me if you've seen this before, two likely Democratic wins. Northam wins over Gillespie in Virginia by about 9 points, and in New Jersey goes for Phil Murphy over the Republican Gaudiano by 14.1%. Should be worth noting this was after 4 years of Chris Christie's administration, though. So usually goes for the party opposite in power, and so far the polling is suggesting Virginia and New Jersey will carry suit and do so once again in 2025. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to hit like and subscribe. If you did, leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts, and leave any suggestions you have for other videos you would like to see me go over. Thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you in a future video.